We also want to talk about global sugar prices. Those of you who read Barron's magazine, been around for a long time, we often talk about the Barron's bump. So Barron's will often do some sort of headline on some particular stock or ETF, and then that stock or ETF will tend to bounce. It's called a Barron bounce. We call it the Barron's bounce, and it tends to work. Barron takes note of the global sugar price rise, and there was actually an interesting story in Barron's that I want to show you here. Let me bring this over. So here's the Barron's article. Sugar prices are high, and El Nino could push them even higher. Let me make this large here so we can see. Read just a little bit of this headline to you, or this story. Sugar prices are soaring, but Balraj Chavan, a 40-year-old farmer in western India, isn't celebrating. While high prices should be good news for farmers like Chavan, the forces driving prices are also hurting his harvest. Sudden rainfall late last year in India, the world's second largest sugar exporter, hit crops and forced India to limit exports to about 6 million metric tons of sugar in the present season, down from 11 million during the previous one. Okay, so the arrival of El Nino puts this at risk. The weather phenomenon, which typically lasts 9 months to a year, can produce drought in India, and it has Indian farmers worried. Without a downpour, they won't have enough water to irrigate the bumper sugar crops they're hopeful for, even as it would push sugar prices, which have risen 27% in 2023, even higher. So India isn't the only country feeling pressure from El Nino, nor is sugar the only commodity at play. Brazil is another major area, so is Thailand. Brazil serving as the world's largest sugar producer, and then Thailand, the third largest exporter, I should say, exporter, not producer. And anyway, so sugar, though, remains at the epicenter of the El Nino phenomenon. The world has had at least 2 years of a global sugar deficit, with consumption higher than production, keeping supplies tight. El Nino will undoubtedly be treated as a bullish signal by the global sugar markets. Okay. So what we're seeing is that sugar has already had a good run. However, the government of India, which is a second largest exporter of sugar, they've basically clamped down. They've suspended sugar exports for the remainder of the season, which ends in September. So, in other words, the overall sugar market is very tight. The International Sugar Organization, an intergovernmental body, says that with prices high, mills are already maximizing sugar production, with 47% of cane juice dedicated to making sugar rather than ethanol, compared to 45.85% last year. That's about the most the industry can switch from ethanol to sugar. And then it talks about candy sellers like Tootsie Roll, for example. It's been hedging sugar, but it's experienced significant cost increases, right? Hershey, which also hedges against sugar prices. They're paying more for sugar, so it's hurting their bottom lines, if you will. Coca-Cola has been reducing sugar in its drinks over the years. They use derivative strategies, but they said the first half of the year looks challenging because of sugar prices, right? However, higher sugar prices are good for who? Well, they're not good for people who use sugar as an input, like Hershey or Tootsie Roll or Coca-Cola, but they're good for sugar manufacturers, right? And so many of those companies are benefiting from all of this. And the story talks about those, like Brazil's Cosan and Luxembourg-based Agro, and also some of these Indian companies that are also producing sugar from sugarcane. But toward the end, it brings up our ETF that we've been tracking here, CANE. Sugar exchange-traded funds offer more direct exposure to futures on the commodity. And then, of course, the sugar ETF we track, and that's CANE, has gained 44% this year, uses sugar futures contracts to gain exposure to the commodity price. So anyway, that little piece in Barron's is basically, coinciding with the fact that we've had the sugar ETF, at the very top of our ETF leaderboard now for 12 consecutive weeks. So sugar is definitely at the top of the heap when it comes to trend strength, and it remains there. I'm a bit surprised, especially with the strength we've seen in tech and some of these other things as well. But it just shows you the sustained nature of this particular rally, and CANE is how we have been benefiting from that. So we told you back on March 5th, so it's been 12 weeks ago now, that it was in a leadership position. We've seen it rally 33% or so since that time. It was up another 3% last week. Will sugar continue higher? Well, as this story is pointing out, El Niño could push it higher, and if the weather patterns are what they are expecting, then the droughts caused by some, the excessive rains caused by others, and then of course the responses, the policy responses by governments trying to protect their own sugar supply when they would typically export it. That puts a lot of pressure there on the sugar price, and so that's something that we're watching. So sugar continues to rally.